one part of these large language models, the parameters and just the scale of it. For context, ChatGPT-1, which was in November of 2022, 117 million parameters, and that's how it can process data. 4.0, I think it's 176 billion parameters. So the scale of these things is massive. But industry tech company like Microsoft, you have the large language models, but now the shift is to small language models and how it gets a little more pointy in that piece of it. And I think one main thing for this audience to differentiate is there's the chat GPT in the media and how it's talking about it. But for Mark and I, we said it's actually the enterprise. It's behind your firewall. It's in your environment. Hallucinations are a thing, but telling a large language model not to make up stuff and prompting is a key differentiator there. It's also a tool, right? Public-private partnership, human in the loop, all these things are in play when we're talking about these capable technologies. I show this slide, hopefully it's coming through, is AI has been around forever, right? Alan Turing and the computers and can it think, and we got into machine learning, but the infrastructure wasn't in place until the early 2000s when cloud computing became a thing and allowed for the development and deployment of neural networks and deep learning. Gen AI is just the next iteration of this piece of it. And so why now, right? And so you got the supercomputers and everything, quantum was the next evolution of that piece once heat solved on that part of it. But that middle part here on the slides, those foundation models that Professor Coyle alluded to, industry and company, we've invested billions into developing these things, and it's got to have a utility to it. It's got to matter for government and working these things through. So unpacking a foundation model from a prosecutorial or admissibility standpoint, I lived through this conversation with computer forensics, and Joe, you brought this up, our task forces, and how do you and for the assistant U.S. attorneys and stuff, how could we articulate to a jury of non-technical people, hey, we have a just hard drive, and we found this same kind of evolution, I think, in a simplistic portion of that. But this is a massive tool, especially in the legal space, and how you guys research and query things, how judges, how courts process and move through. It's that last prong there of that massive data piece of it. It actually lends itself to that capability for sure there. But I'm going to show this slide a little bit. Mark, I'll invite you to chime in here. I show this only because this predates Gen AI. So let's not confuse it with the latest trends on these things. But AI and what it actually means in the context of mission and government mission and business outcomes on this piece. For our platform, we achieved and exceeded human parity years ago. Now, the world I came from, when our task forces, most of our investigations involve criminals in some other country using some other language and some other platform. We did not have the right tools and capabilities to effectively go pursue them. These are usually multi-year investigations. Oftentimes, by the time we got our digital artifacts and evidence from a different country, they'd moved on, right? And so we needed things like translation, transcription. We needed to be able to process massive amounts of data, and that capability. That was one of the first things I did when I joined Microsoft was how do we actually make this real? So in Australia, in the UK, and some other markets, actually using cloud to carve through this. And an extreme example was a few months ago in the UK with the police force there on a 10-week trial, 9 investigations. The force estimated that they saved 236 years in investigative time because they're able to use AI. It wasn't Gen AI, it's just AI to carve through that backlog. These are crimes against persons, child exploitation, financial-based fraud. The utility of this platform and this capability is real. And for a company like Microsoft and industry, we wanted to have that material impact and capability on that part. Mark, I don't know if you, from your work you've been driving in the West Coast there.
Yeah, I mean, the big catalyst for change, of course, was for Microsoft was our partnership and the announcement with the company OpenAI. It's amazing that now the internet's been indexed, right? You can ask using natural language a question in Klingon and have it respond in Spanish, right? So it's just amazing the amount of information that it does know. But it's also a great equalizer, right? For customers, not only on the commercial space where they use technology as a competitive differentiator, but in the government space where you have data as your biggest asset, right? So being able to index your information and get real answers from your data is just a game changer, and it's in a natural way. You don't have to necessarily code everything. I kind of think we're moving from an era pro code builds, big applications for everything, to workflow automations with information that is understood by these large language models and contained in your sovereign, cloud environment that's available only to you.
Yeah, awesome. And then we alluded to this a little bit, the world you guys function and live in, how you grew up, and if you think about your law school days, the content generation, the summarization, we won't worry about code, but semantic search, the ability of these models to really query vast amounts of data. Thomson Reuters deployed using our technology for their Westlaw capability and how you can interrogate and return information. You still got to verify it, but at least it's going to do a citation. You're going to look at it. It's going to simplify that search query. For me, if I'm looking for a missing person, or maybe somebody's wandered off, or a suspect for a crime, and I have over 1 million photos I need to look at. Yes, facial recognition has its biases, it's got shortcomings, but if I'm looking for a white male who's in early 50s and receding hairline and keep his hair short, maybe it can simplify to it's 20 photos to me say, okay, I think that's Kirk, and then verify it through some other means and mechanisms is kind of what we're talking about in that spot. The true value and the true impact for these things, and I can tell you, we as a company, Mark and myself, we are learning every day with prompt engineering. And this is when I think about you guys, your jobs, your experience, your expertise, how you can come up and query data. That's going to be the new magic, and really making these models work for you and to save time on that part of it. And a lot of people in the first couple bullets there, that few shot prompting, Q&A, do X, the chain of thought, we're all conditioned on Google search and queries. And this is a more thoughtful conversational interrogation with these models. For me, that down the last bullet there, that maieutic prompting portion of it, right? When you could ask a question about, hey, what are the macro factors that contribute to climate change? Now work it backwards. If you took a holistic organized crime group that was highly complex, hey, what was for La Costa Nostra, what was the overall organized crime scheme? Well, who's responsible in this state, or who's responsible? You can start interrogating that data to at least start getting that train of thought and capability and start working through that piece. And Mark, I don't know what you're kind of seeing or hearing.
Yeah, I mean, and then, it's historically contextual, right? So what I'm seeing is, discovery is a big target for using AI technologies. You have a lot of discovery that you work through as prosecutors, video and audio correlation, and going through large digitized documents, summarizing things. So there's just an amazing amount of power that it gives you to come up with results. I think I heard a person from Santa Clara speak to, listen, this doesn't have to be the expert, it just has to be my assistant. Somebody's with the eyes on this is going to go through and validate that it's all actually correct. But again, I'll talk a little bit in a few slides about the way that you can tune these tools to be almost completely accurate. There's no way it's going to create anything from your data if you don't want it to do so.
Yeah, and I'm going to play this just as we talk through this, Mark. There's no sound for this, so don't worry about that. But our team had built this is just kind of a, we call them an accelerator. It's just a collection of capabilities. It's using our large language model. But if you remember, the Uvalde Department of Justice did the after action report. So I think it was a 76-page PDF that they published globally. So you can see that he's going to prompt a question here as it plays out. So he's going to ask, what are the key findings of the after action report from Uvalde as he goes through that. And this is with zero human intervention. He's just going to, it knows the document to go look to, so it does that, right? And so this, he recorded a screen, but this is in real time processing. So in a few seconds, it kicks back the 8 key findings with citations, right? As this video kind of plays through, he's going to click on a citation. He goes, okay, now this data, large language models, they chunk data, right? Grabs big blocks of data and carves through that piece of it. But from a prosecutor standpoint, hey, this is actually page 14 of the 610-page document. Here's a citation, here's a source. That would, in my mind, would be your referenceable something. If you needed to admit it, admissible in court, you would go do that piece of it. Here it's told that you, what are you? You're an assistant. You're not to make up. If you don't know, you say you don't know, and you're defining it, how it's going to work and perform for you as an assistant, and not make up information or capabilities. and then follow-on questions. The system and the tools are very easy. Okay, what's the next train of thought, the next thing to do as you go down that thing? So as you build out your investigative process, you could probably follow a very comprehensive, concrete thing. So simple use case, but really that's kind of the next evolution is this skill of that piece. I already alluded to this. Mark, I'm going to hop over to kind of these common questions if you want to maybe go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the professor talked about it a little bit earlier about the myths that are happening in the wild with regards to what AI is and how it can create exposure and risk inside your organization, right? Since our partnership announcement with OpenAI, what we did as part of that announcement is not only took the work that OpenAI had done, but we put it in Microsoft's environment. We provided the compute to make that possible, and then we put guardrails around it. If you have an AI subscription in your or AI service in your Microsoft subscription on your Azure subscription, these are truths, right? Because I get these all the time. You know, how do we make sure our data is secure and you're not actually, you know, training the model or feeding your information to the internet, especially that information that's, you know, federally mandated to be private, right? Well, what happens if you partner with Microsoft and you build your AI service in your Azure subscription? We put guardrails around your information so that it will not expose it to the internet. It will not be leveraged to train the model. It is available only to you and by access controls and rights to see the information. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be other risk and exposure. Can there? Because there could be. You could give somebody the key to the building, and you've got you know, access problems there. It's just an example, but the compliance obligation that Microsoft holds dear, especially as it relates to our public sector customers, and especially as it relates to law and justice and criminal justice information, are very unique. We have a lot of information that we can share with you as to how we actually devise the standards by which we actually index your information, how we curate and deliver it back to you. And so I get that question a lot. So prosecutors I'm working with here in California are like, how are we going to defend our use of this technology? Yes, it's this accelerator. It's going through these large narratives. It's helping us find information quickly. How do we show how it works, right? So we have a lot of information that's compliance related that I'd be happy to share with you. You know, we have a very strong responsible AI status here at Microsoft, and some of the federal policy that you've seen at the national level and I know specifically about California's policy as it relates to responsible AI and the acceptable use. We've been instrumental in creating or co-creating that with these federal and local organizations because they rely on Microsoft and trust Microsoft, right? So we have a great read on the responsible AI policies at Microsoft and how we continue to evolve and enforce those. Kurt talked a little bit earlier, and so did the professor, about the evolution of this technology and the velocity of change, right? All of this is happening so fast. What are Microsoft's guiding principles to ensure that we do the right thing with information so that it doesn't create bias or risk and exposure to your organization?
Yeah, and then Mark, I mean, just for the audience here, I mean, this is how, and this is it's a division within the company, a large group of our legal team that builds this, and this rolls all the way up to Brad Smith, our president on that piece. And a subset of that is sense of use cases, right? You know, understand what is the consequential impact and unintended consequences of some of these AIs, and really being deliberate and working with as many stakeholders as possible. And Christy, we're going to close off just in the interest of time here, but even like the deep fakes, it's not an easy thing to solve for. There are 60 national elections around the world. Microsoft and our Defending Democracy work that kind of fits under the responsible AI piece, working with what would be, you know, viewed as competitive cloud providers and other groups around the world. How do we actually help with the deep fake piece to understand it? You know, do we watermark these capabilities? And there's a lot of work and effort on that piece of it. And so net for me is public-private partnership. If you guys have questions, it should never be a transactional relationship with your technology vendors. They should be able to answer and dive deep on these things. If they can't, it might be time to look for a new partner on technology. So
I think, as we spoke earlier, prosecutors have an ethical obligation to keep their investigative information confidential. So they clearly can't put police reports into ChatGPT because that would be violating that rule. It sounds to me like you're developing some kind of private AI that a prosecutor office could use and feed it, and correct me if I'm wrong, and feed it their own information that would not go outside of the four corners of their office. So am I correct about that? And if so, explain to us, how do you feed it things? How do you teach it? I mean, it's like you need like a parenting class or something.
Mark, you want to?
I'm the one that works at the local level with prosecutors and courts and corrections customers. They are doing those things, Christine. And what happens because of our partnership with the company OpenAI, again, we have taken the large language model, the work they've done to index the information on the internet and train the model, and we put it in a private space in your own cloud environment. So if most of the big agencies have a relationship with Microsoft, and they've got what's called a Azure cloud subscription, and AI is just one of those services. Because it's in that service with access only to the organization that it's licensed to, the information doesn't go to the internet. It is private to the organization. So CJIS information is allowed now. We have a policy information and to help you understand how we meet the compliance obligation that you all have to protect that data. And customers are using it to look through videos, again, summarize large narratives, whether they're digital or audio or things like that, and they contain criminal justice data. So it is totally possible today. We help some of our customers build that foundation and then use the information accelerator that Kirk showed to put the guardrails around your information so you don't have that risk and exposure.
Yeah, and so in building on that part of it too, so for Microsoft, we have over, I think it's 176,000 miles of cable laid around the world. Once you go through your ISP into our cloud environment, you're no longer in the internet anyway, structurally and physically, and then all the other controls, so encryption, data processing, transit at rest, and all those things. So Mark makes a huge point. It's in your enterprise environment, and that's all table stakes for us.
Yeah, but there is a lot of risk if you were to do a search on ChatGPT on the internet or using any of the other competitive products. You are going to feed that information to the internet. So it's important that you have your own dedicated workspace that's private only to you.
Sophia, I think you had a question.
My question was just whether or not, like these internal processes, let's say we're filling in the face, like we were shown earlier, can the product be trained essentially to say, I filled in this face, but the problem with my filling in this face is that I've got a sample of X number of apparently white faces, X number of apparently, fill in the blank different categories of faces, so that we're able to kind of discover what the limitations of the generated product are along with the generated products. I see this as potentially having some use as circumstantial evidence, maybe less so than direct evidence, but we would only be able to do something like that if we were able to disclose what the limitations were of whatever interpretations being given or shown to a jury.
Mark, your thoughts?
Well, so that's true on the creation side, but keep in mind, you can tune these services so they're absolute literal, right? It's only going to use your information and the knowledge contained within it, right? So if you're going to the large language model on the internet to use it to create an image from a fuzzy picture, I don't know today how you would get the stats that you were looking for, right? But there's always going to be the risk of bias. There's always going to be the pool of people that it looks at that could be, smaller in some area. And I think, again, this is meant to be an assistant, and you're always going to have eyes on the creation that it makes, or even the work that it creates that has the absolute information.
Yeah, I think if I understand the question correctly, because even the small language models, they have the ability to actually deploy either on premise. They can use older GPUs. Like, it doesn't have the same physical requirements. A large language model could be more pointy. So if you're looking for a suspect or a missing person, and you create an image with witnesses and whatnot,
Mhm.
Mark's point, you can point that against internal government databases only, and it won't hop over to the
Or
worldwide
in custody
web.
data
Yeah,
only, right? In
yeah,
custody data only, or um, if abused child databases, all you could corral that data and point it only at that, and that's where it's going to create a picture from. So you can create guardrails around the information that.
Of course, if you do that, then you're more likely to have a picture that's generated of somebody who exists in the criminal justice
Yeah.
system, which should actually be more problematic than going
Yeah.
to
It's the
a
bias.
larger
Yeah,
database.
yeah.
Yeah, so like in Maricopa County, we have 20 to 25 different agencies that we get cases from. And in some of the AI solutions I've used, trying to get it to summarize police reports, it does really well with one agency and the way their reports are written. It does really poorly with other agencies.
Mhm.
With these kind of built-in solutions to the Azure cloud, how much training do we have to do on our own? Or, is it going to be something where someone needs to build a program where, because a lot of these things that we want to use it for, they're going to be the same questions over and over again. Summarize the case. Here's the witness. Can you give us some draft questions for an interview or for a cross-examination? Can you list all of the witnesses in the police report? How much of that are we going to have to do our own training, or is someone going to have to build a program based on our parameters and our information?
I was just gonna give you the depends, Jason, which isn't
Yeah.
great, but and I hate talking products, but so for Microsoft, for Copilot's part of our Office suite. So Copilot is effectively the large language model of OpenAI, and we have our graph analytics that makes up Office. Internally, we have that on the enterprise level and how we can use it to do our jobs day to day. There's companies like I mentioned, Thomson Reuters, Axon with their new Draft One solution, because we're a platform company. They've taken those capabilities, they've embedded that into their product, and then they'd sell it to the market. So that's why I think, Jason, it depends on
Yeah.
how you're using it and what product specifically. Mark?
Yeah, and this is not a shrink. When we're talking about Azure OpenAI that has the OpenAI large language model in it, even if it's in your own private subscription, it's going to require tuning. It's not a shrink wrapped product, right? And so you've heard about probably prompt engineering and things like that. It's how you ask the questions. Now there are multiple services that you can layer on to the base service, so it'll do things like understand there's an image in the document, right? Or the document has cells that there are handwritten information in. So there are pieces of technologies that you can layer on to make it easier. We have a big law that's happening here in California called race blind charging, where documents like that have to be ingested, read quickly, and information has to be removed related to racial bias. So we might be able to talk more, Jason. If you reach out to me, I can kind of tell you some of the work that we're doing. But yeah, it does require tuning to the services. It's not an off-the-shelf solution.
Can you explain in a little bit more detail what prompt engineering is?
Well, the short version, and I'm not technical, is how do you ask your data the question that will give you the right answer? Is that fair, Kurt? Is that the?
Yeah, it's as simple as show me the last 10 cases that involve burglary, and then summarize it, and then you have to do like a forward slash. And then you have to put the link to that. It needs to know where to look, right? So you if you have a OneDrive or wherever you store those documents, you tell it where to look, and it'll bound itself and stop one of those documents, and then it would go through. So it's how we're all going to have to kind of evolve to use this technology, is how to think about using these. It's conversational, right? But it does need a little bit of
Yeah, and then but you still might not get the results that you're expecting, and you might know, Jason, that the data is there. So you might have to ask the question a different way to see if it'll deliver insights a different way. But again, it's historically contextual, so it is going to start keying off what you've asked it before. and you can narrow it down. We're starting to do a lot of work in the FOIA request area, right? Because there's a lot of information that has to be filtered through, people removed, things like that. And so depending on how you ask it to do things, it will perform differently.
Yeah. You can save your prompts. You can create a
Yeah, you can save your
catalog of
prompts. People have prompt
and-
libraries.
So you're kind of painting a picture of a world, correct me if I'm wrong. Right now, and let me back up a second. I assume that you have competitors, that there are lots of people in this sphere trying to get their head around how best to harness artificial intelligence. But aside from whichever company one goes with, it sounds like one day, as prosecutors, we will have a subscription model, just like we may have a subscription model to Word, an Outlook, and we will have an AI subscription, which will be our personal AI. We will then have to have training, much like we have trainings now, which will teach our lawyers how to ask questions. And I presume we will need, or you tell me, what other types of people should work in our offices to help us manage AI? Aside from lawyers, we're not the ones that are going to do this. Who, if we wanted to do something like this and use AI, who would you recommend that we hire to help us?
I mean, it's already, this is not a sales pitch. If you're a customer of Microsoft and you have Office 365, you can add, it's an add-on to your subscription. So whoever runs your IT for your respective agency, you can say, hey, I want Copilot. Of course, we charge an additional monthly fee. The return on investment we're seeing from governments is significant. We just published a work trend index with 31,000 people across 31 countries. The time efficiency gain, we had one agency in Australia, 2 hours per day per staff for that particular division is what it was saving for them. So that won't be true for everyone. It just depends on your role, responsibility. So that part's out of the box. There's all sorts of self-help and training online to do. We like doing promptathons with groups and just knowledge exchange from, if you had a bunch of prosecutors in the room, hey, I use it for this, I use it for that, because we're learning as well as a company on what the best thing is. And to Mark's point, creating that library of past use prompts that work can help make you do your job better. It's going to save a ton of time for your staff and for yourself.
Yeah, to your question on the type of people who would you hire to staff this, right? The neat thing about this technology, just as when ChatGPT became available and you could actually ask data natural language questions, right? Show me a route to Texas. I want to stop every 4 hours and stay in a 5-star hotel. It can do that. You can now do that with your own data. That technology exists. It also moves the technology to the edge where the business processes are happening, right? You have a research attorney. He has to go through all of this information and summarize it or find key points or find correlation between different data sets and things like that. That technology all exists. It's going to be a new muscle for all of your organizations. I see everything from people doing, from customers getting, kids out of college into internships that want to focus on AI as a career, to actually using people inside their organization that understand the process and the operations and the business of justice, and they want to come at it from that angle. They just need to be helped a little bit on how they ask their own information questions. So we see a broad range.
I think one of the things, and we will discuss this later in this meeting if we have time, is someone was talking about design thinking, which is where you say, what is my problem? And then how do I solve it? Rather than saying, I have this shiny toy, what can it do for me? I think I can speak for this group when I say that a current pressing problem for prosecutors is absorbing the amount of digital evidence that's available to them, which ranges, of course, from body-worn cameras to downloads of cell phones to surveillance videos and so forth. Is that something that AI can help with?
Yes, it's expert at that, right?
Yeah, it's already doing that. Christine.
Yeah, we're already doing that.
Yeah, we've been doing, that was one of the first things when I joined the company, like I want to go make this real, just because I live that life, right? And it's amazing. And that's not Gen AI, that's just AI and machine learning.
Right.
Hi, David Baker with King County, Washington. I was just curious if you knew when these sort of tools will be available in the government cloud, because we've been talking with a bunch of people at Microsoft. The big limiter is, yes, it's potentially available in commercial cloud, but we have no date on when it will be available in the government cloud.
So the Azure OpenAI for government customers, which is your dedicated Azure service inside your or AI service inside your Azure subscription, that's available today, and we can do custom copilots, right? We can point these tools at your data and say, tell me this. We can do that. Copilots for Office 365, security, I mean, all of the things that I know you're eager to get to because it's been such a big splash in the media, it will be at the end of September. So we were saying summer, but it's going to be at the end of September. And the reason is because of the federal obligation we have to meet the policy around criminal justice data. And we have FedRAMP approvals that we have to get through that take this time. Otherwise, we break the entire service, right? So these copilots are coming to productivity solutions into September for government customers.